My name's Zan Botso. I direct the Center for Applied Ethics here. We're really excited to have Dr. Sylvester Johnson give his talk today. Let me say a little bit about the Center for Applied Ethics if you're not familiar with it. The Center for Applied Ethics is an endowed ethics center which was founded in 2008. It's dedicated to infusing ethics into the curriculum so that every Stout student leaves with a substantive ethics experience. It's also dedicated to being a clearinghouse for ethical deliberation and knowledge. To this end, we offer an interdisciplinary 12-credit applied ethics certificate. So if you're faculty or instructors here, please sort of push that certificate. We'd like to get that enrollment up. That'd be fantastic. We host speakers such as Dr. Johnson, who are experts on relevant topics in ethics. And we put on community outreach programming like our Philosopher's Cafe, which is an informal public forum held monthly at Brewery Nanak, where students, faculty, staff, and community members meet to discuss important and controversial moral topics in a relaxed and enjoyable setting. I think we have the schedule for this year's Philosopher's Cafe on a table if you want to pick that up. We have 3 more this coming year. In fact, they've been so popular, we can't fit in that back room anymore, so we've taken over all of Brewery Nanak on Mondays for the final 3 sessions for the year, so it should be fun. But today I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Sylvester Johnson, whose talk is entitled From AI to Human Engineering, Governing the Ethical Future of Technology and Humanity. Dr. Johnson is the 2024 Kluge Chair in Technology and Society at the Kluge Center in the Library of Congress and is the founding CEO of the Corporation for Public Interest Technology, a public benefit company whose mission centers on making technology accountable to public interest and social justice. He is also professor of Black Studies at Northwestern University. Johnson formerly served as Associate Vice Provost for Public Interest Technology at Virginia Tech, where he was the founding director of the Center for Humanities. His research has examined religion, race, and empire in the Atlantic world, religion and sexuality, national security practices, and the impact of intelligent machines and human enhancement on human identity and race. He is a founding co-editor of the Journal of Africana Religions and is the author of numerous books. He is currently writing a book on human identity in an age of intelligent machines and human-machine symbiosis. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much to Zan Bozo for your really kind, generous introduction and also engagement and making this invitation possible, bringing me here. Excited to be here with you in Menominee at the University of Wisconsin-Stout. I've been looking forward to this for many months and had the opportunity to meet your Chancellor, Frank, and Provost Rodriguez some time ago. It's great to see you both here as well. And I think it was a Polytechnic summit that happened at Utah Tech some time ago. Really have been very excited about the transformative work that you are doing here at your university to prepare future talent for a world that will demand even more nuance, even more, I think, thoughtful combinations of bringing together our human-centered approaches and our capacity as a technological society to address some of the hardest problems that we are facing as a world that are not merely technical, but that are socio-technical in nature. And so I've been inspired by your mission and by your execution of that mission and your imagination of how we can elevate our ability to nurture even greater aspirations among our students, and to do that in a way that is collaborative and in partnership with the many different sectors of our society. So I thank you again for this invitation. Really glad to be here and very appreciative of the conversations that you have on the schedule. I'm looking forward to those. And also we'll be sticking around for Scott Hartley's talk tomorrow, who's going to be here. Scott and I had a chance to meet a few years back, and excited about the work that he has been elevating as well. So thank you again. And I also appreciate the 40-degree increase in temperature since yesterday. So I just flew in from Chicago. I know what winter is, but I think you're a little bit more wintry than we were. I think we were down to -7 yesterday, and you were about 12 to 15 degrees cooler than that. But at least we get early spring for a day and back to winter tomorrow. So, but at least we still have winter. So it is nice to see. We need the snow and ice as well at some time. But great to be here. I want to speak with you today about some of the intersection of AI and what is sometimes referred as genetic engineering or genomics. I have somewhat playfully termed this human engineering. I haven't, maybe that phrase is out there. If you find a place that uses it, tell me, because I'd love to see how they're interpreting that. I actually imagine one day, in the not too distant future, there will be some area or sector of a university that is something like a School of Human Engineering or Department of Human Engineering that tries to address this intersection. But maybe that won't happen. Maybe it'll happen first in a biotech company or something like that. But that's what I'm getting at by that phrase. It is our ability to reimagine and to design and redesign certainly not only humans, but humans from the genetic and cellular level up, but also other life forms, not just humans. But that intersection is what I want to talk about, and I want to do so in a way that points attention to what I think is one of the most important grand challenges that we're sort of already facing, even though it's not as easy to discern as it will become in the coming years. And that is, how do we actually manage the way that these technologies are impacting our society at a very human level, in ways that are cultural, in ways that are personal and interpersonal, in ways that are psychological and emotional and political, and they're also economic. So I'll do that, and I want to talk about some developments in AI that if you've not been hiding under a rock, you've probably already heard about some of these things, and try to give some context to them and give a sense of what might be on the horizon. No one really knows the future, but we certainly have some very clear trend lines. And explore that intersection of AI with genomics in order to hopefully clarify the reasons why the things that are technical or not only technical, they're socio-technical, and our social and cultural formations in our society are already in conversation with both shorter and longer histories of technology that we need to be attuned to, so that we can be much more thoughtful about not only as higher ed institutions, but as a human society, how we are going to pursue a human mission, a human-centered mission, in the way that is going to best position us for the things that it looks like we're going to be doing in the coming years. Okay, so that's the gist of this. I'm really eager to also hear your thoughts, and so there's time for Q&A in this conversation, and so I look forward to you not just asking questions, although I'd love to hear those, but also any comments and responses that you might have. So let's dive in. As you are, many of you are well aware, AI is all the rage in a sense that it's hard to go a day or two and read any significant news in our media without something being said about AI. And in many ways, that's great. We certainly need to have more journalistic coverage of this. If I could make an understatement and say that AI is having a lot of impacts on our society in ways, some ways I think people have been able to anticipate, but other ways people have not. And I just want to quickly summarize what many of you are probably already familiar with, but it's nice not to make too many assumptions about things. And that is that there's a big category of something called artificial intelligence, and then there are more specific forms of that. And what we tend to hear in the media from day to day is one of those specific forms that's there in green. But artificial intelligence is is a decades-old set of technologies that are at the heart of some of the most interesting and I think fascinating developments in computing and material science and electrical engineering. And one shorthand way of trying to understand what artificial intelligence is that I like to use, and there are different definitions out there that have their different ways of being useful. But one shorthand way is that when machines are doing things that we think require intelligence when humans do them, then that's a useful, non-technical, practical way of trying to understand what artificial intelligence is. So when machines are doing things that we think requires intelligence when humans do them, that is a shorthand way of identifying artificial intelligence. And if you think of, if I asked you for directions, or if you asked me for directions, and I asked you, well, where are you starting, and I asked you, where are you trying to go, and then I gave you on the fly a way to get there, you would probably assume that I need to be able to think thoughts and figure out things to practice some form of intelligence in order to provide you with that. And so GPS can be seen as one example of AI. If you sat down and played a game of chess with me, even if you beat me, if I at least lasted long enough for you to have to think a little bit and exercise one or two strategies before you got checkmate, then you would reasonably assume that I have to have at least some minimal activity going on in the brain in order to process information. And so computers playing chess are one of the older examples of what's been called artificial intelligence. So that's been around for decades. Earliest time period, think of World War II era, 1940s going forward, really began to emerge strongly with a lot of investment in the 50s and 60s, and the so-called space race era put a lot of money into computing. Machine learning is a relatively more recent development in the history of AI, and machine learning is one form of AI that was sort of developed because of what might be seen as an accident, that one company, NVIDIA, started to make these cards that were processing data just for graphics. And they turned out to be very useful for processing a lot of information for what became machine learning. But machine learning is basically a process of showing lots of data to a software program so that software program can pick out a pattern and eventually can use those patterns to classify things that it's never seen before. Okay? And you've probably heard this example before. If you had to explain to someone, what is a cat? If you had to try to program a computer to know what a cat is, it turns out it's actually really hard to even tell another human what a cat is, let alone a machine, to say, well, look for something that has 4 legs and pointy ears and fur. Well, that's a lot of different things, right? That's not cat. What is a cat? But if you could just show, say, 500,000 or a couple of million images of cats to the software and have it to develop a pattern of recognizing that, then you wouldn't have to try to describe what a cat is. You could then show it a picture of a dog and a cat, and it would pretty reliably classify which one was the cat and which one was not. Okay? And that technology was important because it meant that you didn't have to program and give instructions in order for a machine to do things that are actually pretty hard to do if you're trying to give specific instructions. So machine learning refers to that form of AI, and that particularly took off in the late 2000s and 2010s or 20-teens. Generative AI is what we usually hear about today. If you're reading an article or hearing a newscast about AI, they're probably talking about generative, though not necessarily, but usually. And generative AI, if you think about that software program that sees that's shown images of a cat, tries to classify one, generative AI is called generative because it can generate something. It could be an image, it could be a sound, it could be a video, it could be text, and this started off as text. It can generate something that it hasn't been shown before. based on what it has been shown before. So think of how people learn to draw. If you put Sylvester Johnson in an art class, they probably tell you very quickly he needs a tutor. He's gonna need some assistance. I'm not a great artist. But if you put me in a drawing class and I would start out drawing pictures of a cat, and then you ask me to draw one, and I try to draw something that I hadn't seen before, but it would obviously be informed by what I had been trained on. And generative AI is the same thing. So it's called Gen AI because it is generating something that has not been shown before. And so those distinctions are helpful to keep in mind. What has developed more quickly than anything else is generative AI, the capacities. The amount of funding that has gone into generative AI has demonstrated the kind of optimism. Some might say ill-founded, others might say well-founded, but the optimism behind this particular kind of form of technology. What I will point to quickly as one of the most distinctive aspects of generative AI, and many of you who are already involved in thinking institutionally about AI will say, when I say this, you'll say, oh yeah, we realize that. Is unlike the earlier forms of AI, because generative AI has made English the most important programming language, or another language, think of French or German or Swahili or Mandarin, a programming language. So those are not machine languages, those are human languages that people speak in the everyday. Because those everyday languages are now programming languages, because you can now control a generative AI software program just by writing or speaking as you would to another person, because you don't need to learn a computing language. Anybody can use this. And if you are in an administrative capacity trying to figure out how to run an organization, you might be chuckling, or you might be doing the opposite of chuckling. So that's both a gift and a curse. You know, if you run a company, and I have a startup that's focusing on public interest tech and figuring out how technology might be harnessed in a way to create some positive benefit for society. And so we work with clients who have teams, and we tell them that on the one hand, the old forms of AI, there were only probably 3 or 4 people in your organization who could use it, because they were the only people who knew how to code. Okay? But everybody in your organization knows how to speak a human language, which means they can all use this technology. And so that, I think, is probably one of the 2 or 3 most important distinctions of generative AI, is that anyone can use it. And it's sort of like if you were alive and could remember using computers before they had hard drives, and when you had to learn what was called syntax just to do basic things. If you wanted to run a word processor, you had a boot disk. Remember that? And then you had, I see some head nodding, okay. And then you had your program disk, and you put in your boot disk just to get the computer to start up, and then you took it out and you put in your program disk, WordStar if you were really sophisticated, and WordPerfect if you waited long enough for that to come along, and ran that. You know the difference that it made between having to learn syntax and when pictures came along, when icons came along, when you didn't need to know any of that syntax. You could just, if you wanted to open something, you just click on it. You'd find the picture and click on it. You didn't need to type a command. Right? This is sort of that on steroids, because those icons made it easy for everybody to use. Generative AI makes it easy, in theory, for anyone to use this AI. In practice, everything is more complicated than it looks at first. But that's something that is probably among the top 2 or 3 most distinctive aspects of this technology. Lots of disruption happening, lots of investment. I think we all remember when we went away for winter break back in the fall of November of 2022. And then we came back in January of 23, and no one knew how to teach classes, no one knew how to grade papers, no one knew how to do anything. We were all figuring out how do we keep people from cheating? What do we do with this technology? And it has quickly begun to morph into different kinds of applications. If we think about the future trends of some of this, there's no shortage of predictions about where AI is going to go. And if I knew the future, I'd be somewhere in front of a computer trading stocks right now, making billions of dollars a second. I don't actually know the future. No one knows the future. But I will try to speak to some of these trends because there are some very clear trend lines that we should not ignore, that we can certainly say, based on where things are now, based on where investment's going, looking at where a lot of the R&D is happening and where technical progress is getting made and market demands, we can make some reliably good efforts to say where we think things are going to go in the next few years. So one of the ways that AI is going to continue to move in the coming years is in an area called cybernetics. This is human-machine combining, and there are different ways that cybernetics are happening. The most important way is in medical therapies. So this is everything from brain implants to machine parts that might, some people already have insulin injected into their bodies with an algorithmically controlled module that's attached to their bodies to help them manage diabetes, for example. And that uses software, and it uses AI software in order to monitor that. Other people have monitoring systems that will automatically detect their glucose level and alert them if there's a significant increase or decrease in their glucose level. That's running on AI. In all likelihood, we will see a huge increase in those kinds of applications where people are being combined with machine parts. And again, much of that will be for medical therapies. Other things might not be. It could be something recreational, something as simple as putting on a pair of glasses that provide augmented reality access. And maybe that's for entertainment, maybe it's for work. It's not a medical therapy per se. But the cybernetics is definitely going to see lots of increased applications from advances in AI. Quantum computing is another area. This is computing that is much more powerful, particularly for applications such as solving puzzles, such as cryptography. So creating codes that are hard to break or cracking codes for purposes of cybersecurity, but also for a range of issues in computing. Quantum computing relies on a very different paradigm of computing and is based on the binary spin of electrons that presupposes the possibility of those electrons occupying more than one physical state at once, which doesn't seem like it should be possible, but in quantum theory seems very much to be the case. All of that means is that for a given amount of material that goes into a computer, you get an exponential increase in the computational power of that system. That's the significance of it. I'm not going to try to explain the technicalities of quantum computing because I'd be way out of my league. But its impact on our society is going to be that what seems to be a little bit of computer is going so far beyond what most people have imagined in terms of what it can produce. And much more quickly, producing in a few minutes what might take thousands of years, for example, for a traditional computer to actually generate. You probably have already heard about AI agents. So if you haven't, just don't worry. This has nothing to do with the FBI or anything like that. Well, actually, maybe they're using the software too. But AI agents refers to software that is artificial intelligence software that can not only process information, but it can take actions, can make decisions and take actions without a human having to tell it every time to take that action. Some of you might have already used what could be considered a simple version of an AI agent. So if you've ever used a platform, Calendly, to schedule your meetings, this is a platform that you can log on to, create an account. You can give it permission to access your calendar in the cloud. And then people can go to its website and say, I want to meet with Sylvester Johnson. And I can say, on Wednesdays from 1 to 5, take meetings for me. And let them last 30 minutes each. And so people can just go to that website. They can say, okay, I'm going to meet with Sylvester Johnson next Wednesday at 3 p.m. And it will let them make the appointment. It will email them a confirmation. It will email me a confirmation. It will go into my calendar, and it will change that calendar, and it will put that appointment in my calendar. I don't have to do anything else once I give it permission to do that. So it's making some decisions and it's taking some actions. So that's a very simplified version of an agent. But the agents that are being developed now and that are coming are going to be able to do far more complicated actions without a human having to tell it along the way to do those things. And so this is another paradigm in automating labor and creating more efficiencies that can create some gains, and it can also create some challenges. You might imagine if software is taking actions without a human validating every action as it happens and goes by, it would be easy for something to go wrong at scale, but also easy for something to go right at scale. But you're going to hear a lot about agents in 2025 if you haven't already, and if you are trying to figure out what might be the horizon commercially and also just in terms of social impact, it is something to watch out for. Those are relatively, the cybernetics and AI agents are relatively close. Quantum computing, there's not really a viable commercialized application of quantum computing yet, but there's some things that seem like maybe in a few years there could be something that would be worth commercializing. But the development is there, the R&D is there, and at least the proof of concept is already there. So it seems reasonable to think that in the coming years and decades, we're going to see huge impacts from that quantum. So these are some of the future developments in AI. So I've talked about those two things, kind of a basic what is AI, and then let's look at the horizon of AI as a background to what I'm about to say. Because one way to put this is that right now, quote unquote, everybody's talking about AI, okay? And we should be talking about it. It's important. There's some other things that are happening that I think, and not I alone, that lots of organizations like the World Economic Forum and the McKinsey Institute, for example, do this prognosis. They've written lots about the likelihood of things developing, that they also think so. I don't want to claim to be the only person in the world who thinks that this intersection is going to be world-changing. But the intersection of AI plus genomics is going to fundamentally change our world in ways that can be very positive if we govern it well, and that can create really harmful effects if we don't govern it well, if we don't manage it well. I want to invite you, as you hear every day the news about AI, to think about genomics, to think about human engineering. Because the implications of that intersection are going to have such important outsized impact on the need for us to actually govern this technology. Here's why I say that. Back in 2017, that sounds like a long time ago, it was 8 years ago, this individual, He-Jian Kui, became very famous, some might say infamous, because he announced at a research conference that he had genetically modified twin human embryos in order to make them immune to HIV. So he presented this at a research conference, and word went out, and it quickly created a huge uproar. He had been educated in China and the US as well. He studied at Rice University, where he did a PhD, and he had returned to China to carry on his scientific research. He was arrested and incarcerated by the Chinese government because he had violated fundamental ethical laws pertaining to genetic engineering. And the gist of that is that you can genetically modify human cells that are not reproductive cells. But you're not supposed to genetically modify cells that are reproductive cells, because that affects not just the person being modified, that affects their offspring. And those cells, because they're reproductive cells, mean that the offspring will carry whatever genetic changes that have happened. And it's not certain what the effect might be on those offspring. So he did that, and he did it on purpose, and he did it because he wanted to demonstrate that it would be possible through genetic engineering for people to have immunity to HIV. Now, why did he think that? There are people walking around on Earth right now who have a genetic mutation that makes them immune to AIDS. So if they have the virus in their bodies, the virus cannot get into their cells. and it can't get inside their cells because they just have this mutation that changes the nature of their cell membrane. That mutation means the virus can't penetrate the cell membrane. If the virus can't get inside the membrane, it can't get to the genetic core to replicate itself, and it can't do its thing. So they're immune, in effect. So he tried to replicate this genetic mutation in these twin embryos. So this was years ago, 2017, 2018, this hits the fan, it's all in the news, and things are going on. So that was 7 or 8 years ago. Those children were born. They're around 8 years old today, 2 girls who are in China. They've not been experimented on because these are children. So no one has tested his hypothesis, okay? No one's been able to validate that. And yet there is some reason to believe that in theory it could have worked, but the way he did it was unethical. He even misled the parents about what he was doing. And I say that because I want to be clear. The consensus globally was that what he did was fundamentally wrong, and he was widely condemned. What I will say is that we should not assume that because what he did was unethical, we should not assume that this means that genetic engineering of what are called germ cells, reproductive cells, is never going to happen. I'll try to suggest something, in fact, quite the opposite at the end of this talk. I'm not condoning what he did. What he did was clearly ethically wrong. No question about it. The important question to keep in mind is he was using CRISPR-9 methodology. By the way, that's a way of modifying genetic material. You can add DNA to genetic material. You can take away DNA using CRISPR-9 methodology. Because that methodology has improved and continues to improve, it's not unlikely that at some point it will become so well validated and reliable that people will recognize the benefit of ensuring, for example, that offspring and their offspring might not have to ever again worry about a particular kind of disease. So I'm going to come back to that point. But this was 2017 and 2018. He was released from prison in 2023. And the first thing he did when he got out of prison, he was fined around $500,000 if you convert it to US dollars. Okay? So he was punished. When he got out of prison, he opened a new lab and he went to work on muscular dystrophy. So he's seeking a genetic cure for muscular dystrophy. He's not moved away from this effort. But he's not alone. He's not unlike other human beings. There are scientists all over this world, in fact, who are working really hard to develop reliable ways to genetically modify human beings for purposes of medical therapies. And in 2023, December of 2023, the Food and Drug Administration did something that was truly historic. They approved the first genetic treatment and cure for sickle cell anemia. Okay, the US FDA, United States Food and Drug Administration, approved the first genetic treatment and cure for sickle cell anemia. And it's actually 2 treatments by 2 different companies, biotech companies. One of them is featured here on this slide, LifeGenia. And this image that you're looking at is from their brochure. You can Google this and read more about it. You can download their brochure, it's online. Sickle cell anemia affects over 100,000 people in the US alone. It is a disease that is due to a genetic mutation that causes the red blood cells, which are produced from bone marrow cells, by the way. Your red blood cells come from your bone marrow cells. It causes the red blood cells to be, instead of round, as a normal cell is, to be shaped more like a sickle, sort of like you might imagine a crescent moon being shaped. And because of that warped shape of the blood cell, it means those red blood cells cannot do well the most important work that they do. They're supposed to carry oxygen throughout your body. And the red blood cell has, it bonds to iron, which attracts the oxygen, and it can carry that through your blood. So people who have sickle cell anemia suffer from many, many different problems, including very early deaths. People can die very early as children or as young adults from sickle cell anemia. Even if they survive to be young adults, they often have to be hospitalized repeatedly throughout their lives because of severe pain, for example, and loss of the ability to do certain physical activity. So it's a fatal disease that can be fatal at different points in life. And it is a very painful disease. It's also a very expensive disease if you have to spend your life with long stints of hospitalizations going on. So these two methodologies, one of which is LifeGenia, which is the company here that you can read about, corrects this problem by genetically modifying the cells of the person with sickle cell anemia. And after modifying those cells, reintroducing those cells back into the body of the patient so that that patient will be able to produce normal blood cells. So this is not a drug that's injected into the body. This is genetically redesigning the person's own cells so that those cells begin to replicate and produce healthy, normal red blood cells for the rest of their life because you have now changed their DNA. It doesn't wear off after a day or a month or a year. You have changed, you have reprogrammed their cells. That's what and what they're doing is introducing new genetic material into that cell that corrects the DNA that's coding for the production of red blood cells, okay? The genes that are involved in that. So this is a permanent way of dealing with this issue. This is not just a treatment. These together constitute genetic cures. The cost of this treatment is $2.2 million per patient, right? And you may think, well, that's absurd. Like, who's going to pay $2.2 million? Insurance companies. Why would insurance companies pay that much money? And I'm not saying they're eager to, okay? They're not climbing over themselves to pay this. But this has been approved. Understand, people have already been treated with this. It's already been success. This is not something that might happen in the future. This is history, is what I'm showing. It's already been done. Insurance companies have already paid this, okay? Why would they be motivated to? Well, part of the reason is what I told you, that people who have sickle cell have to be hospitalized throughout their entire life. This is a way of ending the need for that, and so you can save money over the life of the patient. And then there's just what companies are supposed to do. Diabetes is another area that has been targeted for treatment with genetic therapies. CRISPR Therapeutics is another company that has done this. And it's the same concept. You reprogram the person's pancreatic cells, which produce insulin so that their bodies produce a normal level of insulin, reintroduce those back into the person, into the patient, and they can then live successfully even though they've had this genetic issue. Now their bodies can produce the insulin. This is a different paradigm because it is a medical therapy. It's not a drug. It's changing the information in your cells. And this is not futuristic one day. I'm telling you, this is stuff that's already been going on. However, it's very early. So the list of diseases that can be treated today that are FDA approved through genetic therapies is a very short list. But what I want to suggest is that with all the investment that's going on and the momentum in R&D and biotech, what we're seeing is just the beginning. We will see more and more examples of this. It's not just treating diseases, however. It's also developing any kind of intervention into the metabolic functions of a person or developing new proteins to figure out how to treat diseases. So what you're looking at now is a photo of a team of researchers at Stanford University who were led by the person in the white lab coat in the center there, Brian Hiei, who have been using AI, generative AI, to create new synthetic nucleic acids, everything from proteins to new genetic material. And this is how they're doing that. So I've told you that generative AI is called generative because it can generate or create something that it's not seen before, that it's not encountered before. And if you've ever played around with an LLM, you can say, write me a poem about crossing the street while juggling balloons, whatever. And it'll just, that poem's never been written yet. So it'll just churn out that poem. And you can tell it, make it rhyme and have every first word of each line to begin with the same letter of the alphabet or something. And it'll come up with it. You just give it these parameters and it'll come up with it. Well, what Brian Hiei asked a few years ago when he first discovered the potential of LLMs like ChatGPT, he said, well, if software can model language, and if it can take a model of that language, create a model, a mathematical model of it, in order to generate something that it's not seen before, that's still language, that still communicates, that still works, it still functions syntactically, grammatically, etc., can it also model genomic data? Instead of the alphabet, instead of words, what if you took a data set that had the entire human genome in it, and that described, because it had that genome, all the different kinds of proteins that the body produces and interacts with. And then after training it on the genome, just as you train it on text and language, train it on the genome, and then ask it to create a new protein that doesn't exist that can perform a certain function. And what his team found is that it actually worked, because there is nothing inherent to computation that limits computing, which is basically foundationally mathematical anyhow. It's not textual, it's actually numerical. Like the computers are doing math, okay? That's what processors are doing. There's nothing inherent to computation that says that computers can only model language. They can model patterns. They can model data. And this is genomic data instead of textual data. So the generative AI in his lab is creating new proteins in a digital version of it, and then they can synthesize those proteins in the lab, and they can validate whether those proteins are actually doing what the AI had indicated that they might do. And this has led to the discovery of new protein structures that actually have biochemical functions, that have medicinal potential, that have the potential to be used in treatment for diseases. So this is creating new DNA, new genes. Genes code for proteins, but you don't need the genes to get the proteins. You can just build the proteins. Proteins are involved in every single physiological process in your body, including pathologies and disease. If there's some sickness or disease you have, somewhere in there, proteins are involved. And being able to disrupt those proteins can disrupt that disease, et cetera. If you want to disrupt a protein, you can model it and ask the AI to come up with it. So this is now happening. And there are labs across this world that are doing this. In fact, the executive order on the shorthand is responsible AI, was executive order on safe, trustworthy, and responsible AI. That was issued in the fall of 2023, and that was recently nullified by the current administration, Donald Trump's administration. That executive order actually stipulated that the production of synthetic nucleic acids using AI was a national security issue. Because what it means is that you can use the computing to come up with a novel protein or a novel genetic formulation that could target specific people based on their DNA. And you could weaponize that, and it would only affect certain people whose genetic imprint matched whatever you designed that novel protein structure for. Or you could, so that's harmful, or you can use it for drug design. You can use it for gene treatment. Maybe you want to create an ability for people to do something or have a certain biological capacity, and the gene has never existed. But you can now use the AI to design a gene that had never existed before. In order for Sylvester Johnson to, be able to leap 20 feet or to do something else, you can now create that with the AI, and it can do it in a relatively short period of time. And so this is why that executive order named this as a national security concern and had required labs that were synthesizing DNA and that were using AI to actually report what they were doing and to register with the federal government so that what they could do could be tracked by the federal government because it was just that important. So the ability to create novel genetic forms is getting made through AI now. And you can begin to imagine, once you grasp the paradigm like Brian he and his team, once you grasp the paradigm, you don't need more than 5 minutes to try to understand where this could go and how significant and game-changing it is. Precision medicine, more broadly, is another area that is emerging as an area to be applied for AI to have applications for many different reasons. What you're looking at is a reproductive system, fully functional, on a chip. It's called Avatar. It was developed by researchers at Northwestern University Medical School, and it consists of a combination of mouse cells and human cells. It uses something called microfluidics, so it measures very small changes in biochemical compositions, and it does so with the aim of being able to personalize medicine. What does that mean, and how does that happen? Very quickly, so instead of testing, Sylvester Johnson has a certain illness or disease. Doctors want to design a new drug to try it out on. Let's say they have the capacity to design new drugs relatively quickly because we have this AI thing going on. Question is, are you just going to test that on me? So, well, Sylvester Johnson, we don't want to test these new drugs on you because these drugs have never been through clinical approval, clinical trials. It's a novel drug, and Sylvester Johnson, we're designing it just for Sylvester Johnson's DNA. No one else's, okay? So you can't do clinical trials with random people for a drug that's designed for only one individual. So what do? Well, Avatar says, we'll take Sylvester Johnson's cells, and let's say this is for the stomach. There's something being designed for, something with his stomach. We'll take some of his stomach cells, and we'll put them on a chip, and we'll basically recreate a micro version of Sylvester on this chip. And then the AI can monitor the changes that are happening biochemically in those cells, because we only need a little bitty tiny piece of Sylvester. Okay? Everything's micro. And the AI monitor, and then we apply the drug that we developed. And then we look at the effect of the drug on his DNA, because we customize it just for his DNA, no one else's. We cannot test this drug on people who are not Sylvester Johnson. It's designed for only one person. Can't do clinical trials. But with a miniature Sylvester on a chip, you can test all kinds of drugs without killing Sylvester. You might kill the miniature version of him, but we're just going to agree that if we have a few cells on a chip, we're just going to agree that, because right now they're agreeing that's not a person. And if something goes wrong, it's just some of his cells, but not him. And if it goes right, we know that we can now apply this drug to him. So this is the future of personalized medicine. You cannot do clinical trials on personalized medicine because it's designed for only one genetic organism. You don't want to apply that to other human beings, but you do need to test it. This makes that possible. So this is just one example. So if you begin to see then the application of computational power that might have quantum applied to it, but even without quantum, even what we have today, you can begin to understand the scale of ability to intervene in not only health, but in life broadly conceived. Multiple capacities. Some of them might be therapeutic. I was injured, I need to be healed. Some of them might be more vanity. I can already jump 3 feet at a time. I like to jump 12 feet at a time. I'd love to see in the dark. What if I had infrared vision? What's the genetic makeup of that? That would work with me. You model me in the AI. You create a digital version of me. Input all of my genetic data, my entire genome. Have the AI to figure out what will help, what will work, given me, biochemically and genetically. Manufacture the gene in the lab. You can apply it to a miniature version of me if you want. But apply it to me, change my DNA, and now, like those patients who have received a lasting treatment and cure so that they don't have to experience sickle cell disease anymore, I can experience something new. This is partly the present of medicine, but especially the future of medicine. It's not just the future of medicine, it's the future of healthcare. Something else we still consider, and then I'll wrap this up with where I think the ethical governance and lessons need to really focus in. Is the collection of health data is one of the most important areas for applying AI as well. And so it's not uncommon to see someone like this person here wearing a smartwatch that's collecting information, everything from their cardiac information, their movement, their steps, their breathing, their sleep patterns, all kinds of things. And there are other sensors that can be applied or taken internally, such as a pill with a chip in it, for example, that you could swallow once a month. And it goes in through your colon system, it collects biochemical data, and then you just go to the restroom, you pass that out. In the meantime, it uploads that data to some cloud computing system that has to have AI because there's a lot of information. So there are lots of ways to collect data, but the most common way is a wearable like this. Hospitals, medical providers are already dealing with a massive amount of data overload. And one of the ways that we've seen this manifesting is that when you go to visit a doctor, you sit down, and usually, if you're like most people, the doctor sits in front of the computer, they turn their side to you, and they turn their face to the screen, and they're entering data. There's now AI that will record the conversation, so the doctor can face you and pay attention to you, and the AI will make the first draft of that report that the doctor can then change. But this is another level. This is collecting your health data, having the AI to analyze that data, and then the insights from that data, okay, can be shared with your medical provider. The companies that are going to be positioned to apply AI to healthcare data, you probably already know some of them are the ones that have a cloud computing system. They have a physical device ecosystem. They have wearables that people already wear. They're developing the AI. The hospitals can't do this. Hospitals are not cloud computing companies. They don't have the infrastructure. They don't own the IP in AI. They don't own algorithms. They don't create those algorithms. They subscribe to that. And so your healthcare provider is going to have to subscribe to this information from a technology company. The amount of data that you can now have access to will be massive. The ability of a doctor to go from, hey, Sylvester, let's see. Oh, yeah, I saw you, did I see you 6 months ago or a year ago? How are you today? To go from that to where they're just trying to read a couple of paragraphs and catch on, and they sort of kind of remember who I was. To go from that to by the time they walk in and see me, I've already been getting daily or weekly medical updates and check-ins from the AI. It's watching over me every day. The instant it sees something out of whack, it can just it won't notify me because they don't want me to get alarmed. It'll notify my healthcare provider. It'll give them a complete summary. It'll tell them everything that's happened of medical significance in the past 6, 8, 12, 100 weeks, whatever you want. It'll chart out probabilistically what might be a causal factor, what could actually correct that situation. The doctor walks in, they've read a summary from the AI, they're still making the medical decisions. But they're doing it now with access to a lot of information, and in between my annual or 6-month checkups, I'm being constantly watched, and I mean that in both a positive sense and also a circumspect sense, by the AI that's looking for something that might be a problem. So if something happens before my next physical checkup, I have a better chance of surviving it and mitigating it before it becomes more catastrophic. This is one of the most important things that's going to happen, and it will absolutely require AI. It will, if any of you are in the medical profession or study it or attached to a medical school or in economics, will quickly recognize this is going to introduce a very fundamental disruption to the business model of healthcare. Because hospitals are going to have to pay for this. Your medical doctor is going to have to pay. Remember, they don't have their own AI. They don't own cloud computing. They have to subscribe to everything. And this is not free. This is an expense. So I'm not saying that cynically. I'm saying that matter-of-factly, that this is why technology is not just technical, it's socio-technical. All right, so those are things that are on the horizon that we need to figure out, and they're all indications of the intersection between AI and genomics, AI and biomedicine, AI and biotech. So there are a couple of points I want to close on in order to underscore the significance of training new talent for this brave new world of the future of humanity that is going to be fundamentally more complicated. And I mean that in a truly rich sense. You know, I think things will be better in many ways, and things can get worse if we don't make them better in many ways. It's up to us how this is going to turn out, but there is the ability to be positively transformative. So the first thing I want to underscore is that the entire modern history I shouldn't use the word modern. The past 75 years of medical research has largely been made possible by the body of one human being. And that human being is this woman, Henrietta Lacks, an African-American woman who was born in Roanoke, Virginia in poverty. In the 50s, she was diagnosed with cervical cancer. She died shortly after that, after she was diagnosed. Scientists across the world have been trying to figure out how to harvest human cells, or even non-human cells, that would stay alive long enough for them to conduct medical research. And for reasons that no one understands, no one knows, no one can explain, when they collected her cells to do the biopsy, her cells, which would typically die in the lab within a few days, her cells never died. They haven't died yet. That was almost over 70 years ago. Her cells haven't died yet. They just keep living. And because they keep living, it makes it possible to do medical research on those human cells for all kinds of things. The polio vaccine was produced because of her cells. And that's what's listed there in 1952. They're called HeLa cells, as short for her name, the first two letters of each of her names, Henrietta Lacks. The HPV vaccine was made possible because of her cells. The coronavirus vaccines were made possible because any research that's being done on human cells is being done with her cells, whether it's a university, hospital, biotech company, it's her cells. No one else's cells will work. You have to have her cells. She lived in poverty, she died in poverty. Her children, her descendants, lived in poverty, died in poverty. They're still in poverty. 2 years ago, or about a year and a half ago, they settled a lawsuit with one biotech company, and the company agreed to an undisclosed amount to provide some monetary compensation to her descendants because she never agreed to hand over her cells. She never agreed to any of the uses of her cells. By having her cells, the companies also have the genome of her family. They never sought permission for that. Hundreds of billions of dollars have been made because of her cells, but her family's never benefited from any of that. And when she was ill, she was legally denied access to health care throughout the United States because this was the 1950s and 60s, because it was still legal to deny health care to black people. If it was a hospital that said, we serve only whites here, you had no legal recourse. And so even getting prevention for what happened to her would have been almost impossible because of that denied access. What does it mean to think about the ownership of not just cells, but the information, the genomics, the data? Who should own that? Who should profit from it? One of the most important questions that we should be asking in the future of AI and human engineering is, what lessons should we be learning from this history of this woman and the entire global history of biotech? Because it doesn't matter what lab it is anywhere in the world. If they're doing research on human cells, this is what makes it possible. So how do we think of value beyond ethical values? What about monetary value? How do we think about that in this context? And last thing, 2013, some of you might recall this was the year that the U.S. Supreme Court ruled that genes are products of nature and cannot be patented. But I should actually change the slide. Naturally occurring genes. So what had happened, there was a company, Myriad Genetics, that was selling for thousands of dollars a genetic test that could tell people whether or not they were genetically predisposed to develop breast cancer based on their DNA. It was a genetic test. It was not a cure for cancer. It was just the test to tell you whether or not you had a high likelihood of developing a cancer. So it was not a treatment, it was not a cure, it was just a test that would indicate likelihood, predisposition. And because they had discovered the genetic makeup of the gene, the DNA of the gene, they didn't create the gene. They just interpreted the genome to understand what made up that gene, what molecules made up the gene. Then they could develop the test to see if that gene or a mutation of it were present. They were charging $5,000 a test. They wouldn't allow any other company to make the test. Other companies tried to make a cheaper test, and they sued those companies. They said, we own this gene. And if you make a test for the gene, we will sue you, and they did. So the ACLU joined other organizations and stakeholders to levy a lawsuit against Myriad Genetics and went all the way up to the U.S. Supreme Court. U.S. Supreme Court ruled, just because you discover a gene doesn't mean you own it. If you walk through the forest and discover a mushroom, you don't get to own the mushroom. You didn't create it, you didn't make it, it was already there. So you're free to pick the mushroom and cook it and add some garlic to it and olive oil and serve up dinner. But you can't go around the world claiming that you own the mushroom. You can't go around the world claiming you own this gene. And they stipulated this applies only to naturally occurring genes. So if you're running your lab and you have your generative AI and you create a novel nucleic acid, a new protein, a new gene, you do own that gene. So the other question we should ask is, we're thinking about value, ethical values, monetary value, intellectual value. Who should own this? How do you structure the ownership of this? And this is where I'll end, we have to continue the kind of work that University of Wisconsin-Stout has been doing at an inspirational level for years, and that is focusing on partnerships across an ecosystem, training future talent in a way that's problem-based. You work on these issues, you think about it, and you integrate different kinds of learning. You know, this talk is supported by the Center for Applied Ethics, run by a great philosopher right here that I had a great lunch with. You need different kinds of talent. If all you have are mathematicians, nothing against the mathematician. I was a chemistry major who loved math and still love math. But if you have just mathematicians, you can't solve this. If you have just chemists and you don't have any computing people, you're not going to solve this problem. If all you have is a room full of legal experts and you don't have any STEM people, if all you have are humanities scholars and you don't have anyone there from biomedicine, you have no one there from statistics, you have no one there from mechanical engineering, we can't govern this future. The only way you can govern this future is if we have this comprehensive approach and we teach our future talent in a way that is attuned to the social part of these socio-technical problems. And we pay attention to the most important developments that have already shaped some of the ethical history of technology, the human side of it. And the last thing I'll say is that we have to maintain our circumspection in a very nuanced way, because it is too easy to be accused of hyping things up. Oh, well, you know, the AI companies are saying they're going to do, the biotech companies are saying they're going to create this cure, that. Yeah, they've been saying for 30, 40 years that they're going to create a genetic cure for sickle cell. Guess what? We now have it. That doesn't mean everything that people predict will happen. But I think our greatest threat in terms of being anticipatory, of trying to predict what's happening, I think in terms of predicting, our greatest threat is that we will become so numb to what people are anticipating that when it happens, we will realize we never prepared for it, that we just claimed it was all hype. That we say, because there is hype. I mean, that's what makes it difficult. There's a lot of hype that's just empty, that's never going to happen. And then there are other things that sound sort of strange and weird, but they're actually happening. They're actually going on. And when we have the intersection of the level of computational innovation that's happening in healthcare and medicine, because I've thought for years that AI has been mostly shaped by the effort to replicate us, humans. What do we do? Okay, let's get the machine to do that. Well, we write language, let's get the machine to write language. We write poetry, let's get the machine to write poetry. You know? I think we've been trying to get the machines to do us. Now we're getting to the point we can redo us. And we're using the machines to help us redesign us. And I'm not against that. As long as we're gonna be comprehensive, be dead serious about how we're going to make it fair, be equitable, because I think what we don't want is for the 0.1% to never have to worry about heart disease and cancer, and the rest of us are just needlessly dying. That's what I mean. We have to be inclusive. And the way we get there, that's societal. It's not just technical. It's societal. So I'll end there. I want to thank you for this invitation. I'm really interested in your thoughts. You don't have to ask me any questions. If you have questions, I'm happy to give my best answer. But I also just love to hear how you at your institution are working through this. How are you thinking about it? Again, I want to express my admiration and fascination with the way that you are producing future talent is so wonderful here. I'm looking forward to more conversations about that, and really delighted to see how, as we move into this future, we can do it with more collaboration, more inspiration, because we face complicated times. It's easy to be cast down. We should be inspired by what our world calls for, and it calls for us to really be so much more committed to the kind of mission that has gotten us this far, and looking forward to those next steps. Thank you very much.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes for Q&A, so I'll walk around with the mic. Any questions for Dr. Johnson?
First off, thank you for coming to our campus. This is a very interesting topic, and I think it's great that you're bringing light to this subject, especially towards the end of your presentation, because honestly, I think we're already there, and I think a lot of people don't know what's going on in the inner back workings right now, not to go negative, but what is your personal thought? Like, is it establishing some sort of rules like the software companies are trying to do, or what is some ways to add some sort of protection where companies don't go the negative or the unethical route?
Yeah, thanks so much for that question. I'll try to be brief. I ran a little bit over time for the talk and want to hear more of your questions and comments. But yeah, so of course there's not just one single thing. I think it's important to have standards, rules, so that certainly needs to be part of the mix. Obviously, by itself, it's not enough. We've seen examples of companies having standards and having ethics committees. Those committees might get dissolved, they go away, something else happens. But that doesn't mean we don't need standards. We should have that, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't have advisory committees. I think we absolutely have to have advisory committees for companies, for teaching and learning. I think one of the most important ways of governing technology is how we include people to be part of it. From making, designing, teaching, and learning about it, we need more participation. We need it in many different ways among many different vectors, and that is the case for all kinds of things. There's no shortage of scientific articles on clinical trials that used to exclude women, for example, or certain racial populations. Then you get a drug out there and it's not effective for women, or they go to an emergency room and present one way with a heart attack, and people don't even know because everybody's been reading only about the way men present or something like that. So we need more participation. We need more on-ramps for more people to be part of the pipeline of making, of regulating, of controlling. We also have to think about this capital issue. So technology is not just a technical thing. Part of how do we finance innovation? Most of it right now is venture capital. And that is super wealthy people want to grow their money, so they'll put money behind someone who has an idea about something. We need that. A lot of the innovations that we have are because of venture capital, when no one else is going to put their money there, or no one else has the money to put there. And at the same time, that's not enough. We need something that people call patient capital. And that is the major aim is not just a monetary return on that money. It is a societal return on public benefit. And there are different kinds of source. Foundations may do that and have done it. Super wealthy people who have so much money that they actually realize they don't need to grow their money because they're going to be just fine for generations have also contributed to patient cap. They'll make an investment in something that's going to have a societal impact without expecting a monetary return. I'm just giving those as examples. That doesn't exhaust the possibilities. But a big part of this is because a lot of the behavior of companies is tied to how the capital is structured that makes it possible for them to do what they do. We have to change that as a global society. It's not even just, well, this nation should do that, that country. That has to be global. And we have to treat this as what it is. This is a global human issue. At the end of the day, it's actually about, and it's not just humans, it's the planet. But if I can just speak in a human political sense, in a very generic kind of way, nonpartisan way, that it's about all humans. And so the most valuable information I think that exists out there in the world today is not your health data, is not Sylvester's emails, is not my shopping data. Those are valuable. If you ask me what's most valuable, I think our genetic data is actually the most valuable data that exists. I think that's what's coming. And the most valuable tech companies are in the AI ecosystem. When we do AI plus biotech, the valuation of those companies is going to be far beyond anything that we're seeing right now. The population of people who have the most valuable genetic data are people in Southern Africa who are racially classified as black. So I didn't say all black people, I didn't say all South Africans. The population of people in Southern Africa, and I don't mean the country, I mean the region, who are racially classified as black. And the reason is that the Homo sapiens began there. The human gene pool, so that's not a race, I'm talking about a genetic population. I'm not talking about a race, okay? The human gene pool has been evolving there longer than anywhere else. So there are more mutations in their DNA than anywhere else on the planet. But the companies that control this innovation in AI, they're not African companies. Those are in the global north. And so the question is, if their data is the most valuable, how do we make sure that ownership gets spread around? So you're not recreating what we have now, which is a lot of hyper-concentration of wealth and power, of other people's information, yours and mine. We have no ownership of those data sets that are made up of our data. We don't own them. How do we avoid replicating that with our genetic future? So I would say if we can figure out those kinds of things, and my list is not exhaustive, I'm just saying a few examples, we can avoid replicating some of these problems. So the way we finance innovation, the way we include people, make sure we're getting the right participation. And again, your mission, make this stuff accessible. Make sure people can actually get in and participate and get access to the learning and information credentials and get positioned. And then how are we going to structure the ownership of the most valuable data? We need to do that differently.
Other questions or comments?
Here's one back there.
Thank you so much for coming today. My question is around AI and its use within hospitals, and how are companies making sure that the use of AI is following HIPAA laws? HIPAA laws?
HIPAA, thank you very much, yes. That's a terrific question. So HIPAA, of course, governs the sharing of medical information, and that's closely protected for good reason. So that's done primarily through agreements with healthcare companies such as hospitals. So those hospitals, of course, already have those agreements in place. There are existing contracts that healthcare companies have with technology companies to manage data. And so, for example, those companies that provide information services that would include AI services to health companies such as hospitals, medical clinics, they have to structure a data security or cybersecurity agreement that demonstrates and validates their ability to prevent that information from getting into the hands of anyone except the people who have access to it. If you're a third-party data provider, then you have a contract with a hospital, you do have a legal right in that instance to be in possession of a patient's data, purely for reasons of cloud computing. not to personally go look at it, but if it's sitting on your servers, realistically, you have possession of the data, right? But you have to secure it. so that no one in your company can go see that data and look at that person's information, and no one can see it in transit. So those are cybersecurity protocols that are currently being applied. What this involves, once you get precision medicine already happens, but once if you can imagine a futuristic outfit where it becomes commercially viable for Sylvester Johnson to go to a clinic with a disease, and they say, well, Sylvester, the biotech company ABC, is going to design a drug just for you. Clearly, ABC needs my genome to do that, right? And so that would have to be a special agreement, and I would have to agree for company ABC to have access to my genome. So those kind of measures that's what happened with Lyfgenia, with that drug that cures the treatment that cures sickle cell. Those patients had to sign a release to agree that their information would be handed over. Those kind of things will happen, are already happening. Once you get a much broader AI ecosystem, however, I think we will probably need more robust systems. And because all information is hackable. If it's in the cloud, it can be hacked. If it's not in your desk drawer in an envelope with some scotch tape over it behind your socks, your dirty socks and t-shirts, it can be hacked if it is online and digital. And this is cloud-based stuff. So this information cannot be made 100% secure. And just as we all get those letters from Bank of America, whatever, Wells Fargo says, oh, well, there was a data leak and your information appears to have been compromised, we'll give you, whatever, a year of complimentary credit. What do they call them? People are monitoring your accounts to make sure there's no untoward activity. There's not I don't know if there's a health version of that. And if there were, I don't know if it'd be too late by the time someone did something with your medical information. But it's likely that we will find the current cybersecurity protocols, once this stuff scales out, are insufficient if, like other things, such as our financial data, they continue to be hacked.
Let me run over here.
What strategies would you suggest for individuals to do to advocate or, work toward making these changes?
Working toward making these changes?
This is, the societal changes that we want to happen.
Yes.
How can an individual contribute to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So I would say, I try to approach that this way. What is the hardest, most fundamental grand challenge that we will face in the future? And my way of answering that is inequality. I think that's the biggest one. It's sort of a tectonic problem, and tectonics are, those are plates that the continents ride around on, even though they don't look like they're moving, they're moving around. And I think inequality is one of those things that other things ride around on top of. They sit on top of those things. And as we work to solve these other problems, if we're not solving for inequality, we will continue to see these asymmetries, and we'll continue to have an issue where a very small number of stakeholders can end up making decisions that affect everybody else, even if everybody else doesn't want to support those things, because you concentrate the ability of people to act and be agents and have control over. I think we have to solve inequality. I think we have to keep that front of mind. I think that as we're talking about technology and other things, that we have to maintain our awareness that there's this big tectonic system. And if we can make it easier for more people to be socially mobile, to have economic viability, to participate in the economy. Future of work is something that comes up a lot with AI. The idea that people will have to rethink employment, how they get jobs, and are they going to, if you get another job, is it going to be one with benefits? Maybe you lose the one that had the benefits, you get this other thing that AI creates, but you don't have the benefits. How do you get health? That kind of thing. We have to control for those things. And as we create more ways for more people to have more economic viability and social mobility, everything else is going to get easier. Then there are some more strategic technical things that we need. We need more people to have access to things like workforce development, learning new skills, and upskilling. That's important. That's not a cure-all, but if we don't have that, as these technologies require people to do different things, and to manage different things. You know, I'll give an example. I think it's fair to say I consider myself one of those educators who is currently having to be upskilled to figure out how to use AI, how to live with AI in an academic institution. How do I give an exam to my students? How do I give a writing exam? I'm currently in the process of being upskilled. If you have any free lessons, send them to me, email them to me. I'm taking all the help I can get. You know, I'm saying that only half jokingly, that all of us in some way will probably find ourselves having to readjust so that we can be able to be viable in the labor market. And that's both for reasons of employment and also for reasons of thriving. Yes, I have this job. I'll continue to have it. Will I thrive as a human and flourish in having it? Those kind of things. We also need to change, and you're already doing this because you're taking this more comprehensive approach as a Polytechnic institution. I think this future tells me it has long been time out for, okay, the STEM people, you go over there, and over here, the humanities people are. I think it's time out. I'm a humanities person, although I've just told you I'm a technologist too. But I don't think the humanities people could say, oh yeah, you know, STEM is a threat. STEM's not a threat. There's no STEM. I've never met a STEM person who tells me that they just can't wait to get rid of humanities. Legislative assemblies often have a different idea. Right. But they're not STEM people. You know, that's a political assembly. It's a legislative assembly. It's time out. All of this stuff about let's just teach people the code or technical. When I look at this future, I think, oh no, we need to collaborate. I should be hanging out with the mathematicians and the biochemists. We should be inviting the humanities people and the legal people to the same party so we can figure out how we can work together. And we need to train our students to work together. And we need to train the Sylvester Johnsons faculty. We have to do it differently because the talent for this future cannot be chopped up and divided and siloed in the way that we've been doing it in the past. If we keep doing that, we're going to keep having really brilliant people in the humanistic disciplines who think that that STEM stuff and technical stuff has nothing to do with them. And they're not interested in that, because they consider it a threat to their existence. We need them to help figure out how to lead this stuff. And they need to be literate enough to help lead it. And we need the math people and the chemistry people and the biology majors to be curious enough about understanding the actual structure of inequality. Because it is the most important lesson that we have to learn from Henrietta Lacks Legis. If we don't learn from that, walking into this future, we're doomed. Doesn't matter who we think we are. We're doomed. We can't miss that lesson, and we've got to be more comprehensive. So those are a few things that come to mind. If you have other ideas, I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Any last question? Okay, Joan.
Yeah, we can take both. Let's take both questions.
Thank you for...
It's on, yes.
It's on? Okay. Thank you so much. I'm curious if you use Mary Shelley's Frankenstein or the modern Prometheus in the work you do. I'm thinking in particular of her subtitle, because she takes Prometheus, the one who gets fire, who shares fire, but also is forethought. Mm-hmm. And if you think about that novel as a cautionary tale, what Dr. Victor Frankenstein fails to do is to stop and reflect. Just because I can do it, should I? And it's only later in the novel that he reflects. And that's when he stops what he's doing. But so much what we've heard today, it's the speed of light that we're moving at. I'm not hearing anything about slowing down, reflecting, critical thinking. So back to the book. Is it something you use? Is it something you talk about?
Yeah, thanks for that. And we can take another question as well, and I can respond to both. Yeah.
Was there another question?
Yes, your provost here, Rodriguez. Okay, great. Yeah, so I'll answer this. Yeah, I've not assigned that text. I've read the text, and it was something we used for a panel that we did on technology and ethics some time. But as you describe it and remind me of some of the contours of that novel, I should use it, because I do use literature in teaching our students about the socio-technical strategies for governing the future of technology. One, because literature is so multidimensional. It's driven by narrative. It brings stuff to life. It invites the kind of nuanced, subtle assessment and discernment that I think doesn't come as easily with different kinds of texts, even though they have their own usefulness. So I should definitely, I'll revisit it. But I've used it for a panel, and you're right, I think it certainly elevates and embodies the need to be reflective and reflexive in an age where things move fast and speed is over-incentivized. This is why I talked about patient capital. We need to be able to support things financially, and the emphasis is not, well, in 3 years, you've got to get 8,000 trillion% return. No. Take your time and figure, and it might not work, but figure it out, take your time, think through it, talk with your stakeholders, and we're not asking you to pay back a 10,000 return on this fund. What we want you to repay is a better society. That's the impact. And that will help us to slow down some things. But I love the novel. I think it's a terrific one. I appreciate the question. Thanks for reminding me of it.
Well, thank you everyone for coming, and let's please thank Dr. Johnson
Thank
again.
you very much.